I'm staying with some family in a very rural area. The closest stores are super far away. Hours. We got here late Friday and are leaving late Monday. Today my cousin and brother happened to see a drone that was following them on the land we have, about 200 plus acres over here. Everyone was a bit confused and didn't really like it because it's creepy and an invasion of privacy on our private property. But we disregarded it, figuring somebody on their land nearby is just bored or something. It's now 2:25 AM Monday, and my parents were together outside, relaxing near the house on this swing chair, listening to the nighttime sounds. And I was inside with my grandparents, in bed with my cousin and two siblings, when I got a sudden phone call at 2 AM. I was very confused and didn't think anyone would be calling right now. I grabbed my phone, realizing it was my mom, so I immediately answered, making sure things were okay outside, since there's plenty of weird insects, poisonous things, snakes, coyotes, wolves, etc. around here, and my mom gets scared easily. She says in a concerned voice, "Me and Dad just saw something flash over our heads, really low down on us, and we don't know what's happening." So I told my cousin and my brother and sister, and everyone seemed pretty freaked out, because that's very unusual. We all run out to the trees by our house and get to my parents, who were staring up at the sky and a bit far away, panicking. As everyone was outside staring around at the sky, we managed to point out multiple drones or something strange in the sky, flashing, getting farther away and closer. We saw one, then another, but then we saw up to 5 and some disappearing. We thought for a moment, oh, stars. But why would my parents have something on them, shining, and they heard whirring sounds? We drove a donkey. I don't know what it's called. It's a small vehicle like a golf cart, but not. But we drove it into the field it was closest to, and we shined a spotlight on it where it was right above the trees. It started coming towards us, and then I saw something weird by it that suddenly went fast towards it. Then it stopped and fell in the woods. So we started driving away and went back home. But then my dad drove over there with my cousin and siblings and my mom. And then my grandma came out onto the porch of the house and was waiting for them to come back while they looked for drones in the sky themselves. I went inside because I was getting bugs on me and disliked it a lot. I started hearing weird noises from outside the house and I heard a yell. And the dog started howling and barking a lot. And then I heard my mom tell my grandma, I just heard my sister scream. And that's something up with the cows my grandparents own. After a bit, my fam all came back, and they're still outside. But my sister came in to explain what was up, with tears in her eyes and fear on her face. She said they went out there and everything was absolutely fine. But then the cows started acting weird, and then she heard it. A loud woman scream, and the UFO was getting closer, flashing green and red. So they drove fast back to us. Everyone's so confused and freaked the hell out. What's happening? Why are these things watching us? Why are there so many? What are they and why? And isn't this illegal? Is it something bad? My wife and I have been together for going on 10 years now, and she's always had what I perceive as a connection to a separate, unseen world that I'm just not privy to. It kind of runs in her family. Her mother, sister, niece and nephew all seem to have some of it. But by far, my wife is the one who is the most in tune, so to speak. For example, she has seen her mother in the house. We live with her father. And has seen other spirits or horrible looking things that will spook and scare her. And she has seen my uncle, who passed December 2017, at his house in the same town. At the end of April, we bought a newer car, a 2014 Infiniti JX35, a mid-size SUV. It has a lot of bells and whistles, one of which has a blind spot warning light on the inside of the car, near where the side mirrors are. Just a standard LED, I assume, that senses when something of a certain size or dimension or something else is there. Anyway, we live currently in a rural little town outside a decent city of almost 1 million people. Well, the town that we live in is right outside of it, about 20 minutes drive. Very rural, very open desert in the southwest. Now, as far as I knew when we got the vehicle, those sensors only picked up other vehicles and large objects. I've not really seen if it picks up smaller motorcycles or bicycles. Well, one night, we turn off the highway onto a road that leads into our town, and my wife points out that the sensor light has lit up. Now, this is a 2-lane highway with a pretty sharp bend after you make the turn off the highway. So when we're going on this road, there's about 5 feet of sand and dirt once you get off the pavement. In this same bend is where, just by the way, the blind spots are, and how the bend is, I assume there has been at least a couple of accidents. However, it would take some reckless driving to really make a bad crash, specifically because you need to turn on and off the highway. Anyway, she points out the light and informs me that she has seen this light or sensor light up frequently, but had just brought this up about a month ago. So now, I'm starting to pay more attention to it, because the bend is to the left and the sensor that lights up is the passenger side. Most times, I do not see it. That night that she brought it up, I tried to trigger it by driving really close to fences, trash bins, light posts and what have you at varying speeds, but to no avail. It lights up when there's a vehicle, and at random. All this brings us to the events of last night. We bought a house in the city at the end of last month, and have been working on almost a nightly basis to paint and fix it prior to us moving in. We had just finished painting and taping walls and trim at close to 9 PM. It was a nice, clear, not too hot night, and my wife decided that we should open our windows and sunroof and turn off the AC. This is out of the ordinary for us, since we live in a very dry and hot part of the country. So we do. I turn off our street and we're headed to my dad's place to pick up our kids, with the windows down. My wife has her right hand out the window. We're in a decently lit part of town, near a Pet Boys, Walgreens and other stores, when my wife suddenly gives out a scream and shiver and places her face into my arm and is holding onto my arm with both hands, not wanting to look anywhere. Alarmed, because it's not normally this bad, I ask her what's going on. Is she okay? All those basic questions. After about 10 to 15 seconds, she looks back at the window and raises the window, closes the sunroof, and tells me to close mine. I do. It is at this time that she tells me what happened. With her hand out the window, out of the corner of the eye, the same sensor light came on. And as she was turning her head to look, she felt what she described as if a hand had graced the top of her arm and hand. She did not say that she saw anything at this time, and I assume that she just did not make it to look after she left what grazed her arm and hand. After closing the windows and sunroof, she stated that they are not welcome and should leave right now. And about 5 seconds later, she shivered and stated she felt cold for a second, but now it was gone. We went to pick the kids up, go eat dinner with our niece and her aunt that were helping us with the house, and drove separately, and went home. When we were almost home again, we saw the light come on, much closer to the house we currently live in, and I tried to drive really close and slow next to a light pole on our property. Not surprisingly, the pole did not get the sensor to light up, even though it was within 4 feet from our vehicle. "10 years ago, my cousin and I were messing around with a paper Ouija board. I was in a weird skeptic house. I followed all kinds of people in the skeptic community, like Penn Jillette, Hitchens, and James Randi. I wanted to see what would happen if I arranged the experiment differently. I wanted to disprove Ouija boards, but got completely unexpected and unexplained but repeatable results. We set up a printed Ouija board with a paper cursor and asked it questions. Then see if it will respond with the paper cursor. To my complete surprise, it did. It's been buzzing in my head once in a while, completely shattering everything I thought I knew. I just can't get over it, and am desperately seeking answers, only to be told that someone else was blowing on it, or the AC was doing it, etc. I guess I'll try again here. This is just one of several sessions, including one I did alone. Some details. I did this in 4 different locations. The place where I was living, works. The hotel room, works. Aunt's house, who was always fascinated with this stuff, works. And the new apartment, which didn't work. I did this with different groups of people. Me alone, me with my cousin, me with uncle and cousin, and me with uncle, aunt, and cousin. It responded consistently after asking questions, but will become weaker as the session grows. We did ask it to flicker the candle, and it did flicker, noticeably, many times. Later, I asked math questions, and it did correctly blow to the letters. Also later on, I stupidly taunted it. It got angry, I guess, and kept blowing the cursor every time I placed it. We did these sessions across almost an entire year, including in January, early evening, when the AC was on. I did suspect maybe an amazing coincidence that the AC would be blowing it. I literally had to put the thing 2 feet next to the AC to make it blow. Temperature during the session? I can only feel this wave of coldness while waiting for an answer. This has been bugging me for years. I really want answers. What's really happening? Would appreciate someone pointing me in the right direction. One time, my mum and I were going out for lunch. We have 2 dogs. One that's £100 and another that's £50, so they aren't small. My mum told me to let them outside before we left, and so I did. An hour later, we get back, and our dogs are not outside. Okay, maybe I didn't let them out. We checked the house, which is a 1-storey, 1,000 square foot place, so not huge. Nothing. Well, maybe they are outside, so they just aren't coming to us. There are plenty of hiding spots in our backyard, with 2 sheds, a lot of trees, and a sectioned off area we call the squirrel yard that the dogs could get into. So I go outside, searching everywhere for them. Nothing. Well, now we're considering the fact that our dogs got out. So we check the perimeter of our yard. We have a 6-foot privacy fence, so our dogs can't jump it. But they've been knowing to dig holes under the fence. Here's the thing, no holes, none. Absolutely no way they could have squeezed under the fence. Now we're thinking someone stole our dogs. Our £100 looks like a pit bull mix, so it would make sense because of dog fights, and maybe they took the £51 for similar reasons. Well, the thing is, they would have had to climb the privacy fence because the fence is padlocked, and the locks were still in place. So how would they get these dogs over the fence? Nixed that idea, turned to checking our house locks. Maybe they came inside. Nah, everything was locked, even the windows. Well, maybe the dogs are inside and they're hiding. We checked everywhere. Under the beds, in closets, even in rooms that were closed off. Nothing. I go back outside and end up taking the grate off our access point to the crawl space, and I crawl around under the house. They aren't there. Our last bet is to go search the neighbourhood, even though there was logically no way they could have gotten out. We leave the house, all the doors locked per usual, and begin searching. Nothing. An hour later, we came home, planning our next move. I'm about to go into the crawl space again when I hear my mom shouting for me. There, laying in the beds, sound asleep, were our dogs. No one else has keys to our house. No locks were broken. All windows shut and locked. There's no logical way for our dogs to have left our property and suddenly reappear, and they were totally fine. One of them is scared of everything, so I would have made sense for him to be freaking out if something happened. But nope. This took place over the course of 3 hours, from the time we got home to when they reappeared. We still can't figure out how our dogs just disappeared. I've always thought that my life was pretty uneventful in the paranormal unexplained category, because I've never seen anything that would turn a skeptic into a believer. However, lately I find myself discussing the weird stuff to happen in my life with several different people. And I've begun to realise that just because I haven't seen any shadow people or felt a hand grabbing me with no one around, that doesn't mean I haven't had brushes with the paranormal. I have to start off by telling you that my grandmother was a bitch. I know that sounds cold, but let me explain. When my mother was young, my grandmother would tell her to go roll on the floor because her hips were too wide. She would use my mum as a personal assistant to the point where my mum would be forced to tickle her for hours. My mum never had any girl talk with my grandmother, never felt truly loved by her, and always felt that my grandmother saw her as competition. This abuse led to my mum becoming anorexic, eating only 1 can of Campbell's soup a day, and eventually leading her to say fuck it and do a complete 360 to eating whatever she wanted and becoming overweight. My mum has always been through a lot because of my grandmother's mental and emotional abuse. This is where my great-grandmother comes in. She lived in my mum's childhood house with the family until the day she died. My mum called her Nonny, as did her brothers. My mum and Nonny ended up being more like mother and daughter, and my mum would seek her out for advice. She learned a lot of life lessons from Nonny. My mum has told me stories of how she would go to work with Nonny and sit behind the makeup counter with her, playing with the test products. She told me about how her bedroom was above Nonny's and that she would stomp 3 times to say, "I love you." And my great-grandmother would make a broom handle and hit the ceiling 4 times to say, "I love you too." When Nonny died, my mother could sense it. She left the hospital to go home and rest, and when she entered the kitchen, she got this wave of relaxed sadness, if that makes any sense. Relief, yet grief, I guess. A minute later, the phone rang. It was my grandfather calling to say that Nonny had passed. Now, fast forward several years. My mum is married and has a young child, aka me. I don't know exactly what my age was, but I had just started speaking. I wasn't at the age where you would expect one to understand death or care about a past relative. Well, during this time, my mum took me to the park in our neighbourhood. It was just my mum and I, no one else out there with us. My favourite thing at the park has always been the swings, so my mum put me on and started pushing me. A few minutes in, I look over to an empty swing. My mum didn't really notice until I said something that shook her to her core. "Mummy, Nonny is swinging with us." I didn't know about Nonny. My mum never mentioned her, never talked about her, because how would I understand who this person was? And to say that name, a name that was specific to this one person who had passed, was beyond comprehension. My mum asked me, "Who was swinging with us?" I replied, "Nonny." I have no memory of this, but my mum tells me the story all the time. It's one of her favourite memories. I moved to Chicago for college, and my roommate is really interested in the paranormal. We bonded over that immediately. The first few days in the dorm were spent introducing ourselves to the neighbours. 2 of them, both sophomores, tell about how our residence hall is haunted. They show us a Snapchat picture of the ghost, which looks like a slightly darker shadow in the midst of other shadows. No, I don't have the photo. My roommate believes it instantly. I, on the other hand, am more of a skeptic. So, like any sane person, we bought a Ouija board. We went to Target first, and I asked one of the older ladies working there if they had a board. She proceeded to give us a lecture on why we shouldn't use the board, which just added to the whole 2 dumb white girls getting murdered by ghosts storyline. Also, we bought a Virgin Mary candle while we were there. Because, Christianity. Anyways, we used the board and spent 5 minutes talking to a drunk ghost named Svep. Didn't get jack shit from the board. Ended up giving it to a friend, so we only used it once. Yes, we said goodbye. Here's where spooky stuff starts. My roommate starts getting bad vibes in the room. I'm thinking it's just because she's worked up from using the board. She's serious about it though, so I make the trip to our local Catholic church, and I get a Bible. I even ask one of the priests to bless it, which he kindly does. About a day later, our Virgin Mary candle gets knocked off the table. The glass shatters, but only around her face. Weird, but hey, shit happens. My roommate starts looking at other rooms and tells me that I should come with her. I tell her that she needs to calm down. Literally, nothing is happening. Some other things happened, but I can't really remember what. But here's the kicker. My roommate was upstairs in the common area while I was in the shower. Bathroom door locked, no other roommates, no pets, nothing. Now, the shower has 2 shelves for us to put stuff on. One is near the shower head and the other is at the back of the tub. I have the shower head positioned so the water is coming pretty much straight down, aka no water is hitting the back shelf. That shelf was mine, so everything I needed was up there, including my razor. So, I'm washing under the water when I suddenly feel something hit the back of my calf and fall to the floor. I look and see my razor down there. Now that was weird, because my razor wasn't anywhere near the edge of the shelf, and neither I nor the water could have knocked it off. I just got hit by a razor with no solid explanation for how it happened. None of that scared me. This is what scared me. In the condensation that formed on the shower wall, I could see the path of the razor tool. It was like something was pressing it against the wall as it fell. The razor's path went up and then down. It lifted up, then came down on me. I ran out of the shower and went upstairs to tell my roommate what happened. I was standing in the common area, soaking wet with only a towel on and soap still on me. My roommate moved out. I stayed. At least until the year was up. Then I switched to a single room in a different residence hall. This hall was next to an alleyway, affectionately called Death Alley. Yeah, what an improvement. Stuff has happened there, but that's a different story. Nothing else happened after that. There's probably a logical explanation, and I've had much weirder things happen to me, but I thought you'd enjoy this weird story. This happened in Daytona Beach, Florida, in 2012. It was a summer between my freshman and sophomore years in high school. A little background. My grandparents lived in Florida at the time, close-ish to Daytona, but not Daytona. We decided to take a vacation within a vacation and spend a weekend at a hotel in Daytona. When we got there, for whatever reason, my grandparents decided they didn't want to stay and that they would come pick me and my mum up at the end of the weekend, since they only lived about an hour away. My mum and I asked them to drop us off at Joe's Crab Shack for dinner, and we were going to walk back to our hotel. Somehow, we completely misjudged how far away the restaurant was from our hotel, so it ended up being an insanely long walk. On the way back to the hotel, it got dark on us. There was enough light from the street to be able to see pretty decently, but to get up to the street, we would have to go through an alleyway, and didn't feel comfortable with that. So we decided to stay on the beach. Now, I want to say, even though it was dark, there was a full moon and enough light from the streets that whenever we passed a person, we could clearly make out their face if we were close enough. So while the dark may have played a small factor in this, I don't think it's enough of a factor that I can just dismiss the experience. So as we're walking, we see a light headed toward us, about 6-ish feet off the ground. We weren't too concerned because it looked like somebody going the opposite direction, as us wearing a headlamp while taking a nighttime stroll on the beach. As the light got closer, we noticed that the light was extremely steady, not like somebody walking, and especially not like somebody walking on the sand. As it got closer to us, this is what we saw. A cloaked figure wearing a brown monk-like cloak with a large hood. It was not walking, but just gliding along. There was no visible feet. There was a light shining out from under the hood of the cloak, but there was no face. Except for the light, it appeared to be completely black inside, almost like an empty cloak floating through the air without a person inside. It didn't seem to notice us and just glided on past. My mum and I remember this exactly the same. I'm a very scientific person, but I still can't really explain this, as it was definitely light enough that we should have seen a face or feet. Has anybody else come across something like this? I grew up in a haunted house. My parents still lived there, and previous to that, my grandmother drank herself to death there. You don't have to believe me at all. I'm a librarian, and I researched the property. It was once an apartment, and it was the only location hit by a tornado once. There was a young boy waiting for the school bus in our driveway, and he was hit by a diesel truck and died. This happened in the 40s or 50s. My parents added a second story and back part to the house. I lived upstairs, and there's a door to the attic attached to the closet space. I often dreamed about the little boy coming out of the attic. Non-relatives have seen the boy appear. I even got a photo of him in full-body apparition. We had asked him to appear, and he did. Growing up, it was all more of an annoyance. Items missing, footsteps at night, the TV with knobs turning and changing channels, radio stations changing wildly. It just did stuff mostly to mess with us. Sometimes scary things would ramp up, especially if my parents talked about moving. It would appear as a shadow. It would appear as a boy looking in the window. It would swing belts in the closet. Often when someone outside the family visits, they feel drained and tired, like it drains their energy. You can see physical orbs flying with intent. Sometimes they come to my video camera and stop and go another direction. I really feel like there is more than just the boy ghost present. My mom has visited by my grandmother's ghost. I was once visited by a headless black dog that had blood spurting out the decapitated part, and I could feel his hot breath on my face. Once, I even levitated in front of my family. Today, while visiting my parents, I got pictures on my phone that became red in appearance with giant orbs. But for the first time, I tried to record an EVP. I've always been hesitant to communicate with the ghosts because it's scary. I asked how it died and it said something. With the naked ear, people think they hear front yard. I'm dead serious about this, and I do not want to argue with anyone. You can believe me or not. It will not change the story. So I just moved into a 5-bedroom house built in 1900 with my boyfriend. The energy in the house has always felt super off. We hear banging a lot and footsteps upstairs. We have 4 roommates, and at least all of us at one point have left the house due to feeling uneasy or scared. Every room in the house has 2 access points in the closet. One to an attic and one to the inside of the wall. Because the house is so old, it has double walled insulation, meaning I'm literally able to stand up and walk inside the walls if I remove the little door. There's also an attic tunnel which leads from my boyfriend and I upstairs bedroom to our roommate's bedroom. Often the sounds we hear come from places where people cannot walk. I also wake up around 2 or 3 a.m. most mornings feeling pretty scared. But other than the above creepiness, nothing has actually happened that I would consider paranormal. Last week, it was really stormy, and the energy felt super off. We were having a loud conversation, talking over each other, when we heard what sounded like a basketball dribbling upstairs. It was loud enough that we all stopped talking to listen to it. Then we heard footsteps from inside the upstairs wall. Roommates had to go to work. I practiced Wicca and was feeling very uneasy, so I decided I would also leave and get some stuff to protect the house from dark energies. Here is the part I cannot explain. I was burning sage, walking around the house, basically saying only positive energies are welcome here, to please not scare us and stop bringing negative energy into the home. On the other end of the house, I had some crystals set up. The cat was with me when this happened, but I heard what sounded like a pig squealing from the other side of the house, and a clatter. Well, I nearly shit myself because the crystals, which were sitting on a flat surface, had all been knocked off the edge. I figured they had fallen behind the couch, so I moved it out of the way. They had fallen behind the couch, and sitting on top of them was a blue hydrangea flower. I have no idea how to explain this. I had just cleaned the carpets and vacuumed behind the couch that week, and my kitten plays back there all the time and rips up everything in sight. Well, this flower was perfectly preserved, not missing a single petal. Even if after all this, it somehow managed to get there, the hydrangea bush out front had been dead for at least a week. None of my roommates were home or knew I would be blessing the house, so they didn't do it to mess with me. I still feel uneasy on the other side of the house when I'm alone, but on the other side, I found the flower on which I feel peaceful. The only place that gives off really dark vibes is the closet with the creepy tunnel and attic access. Anyway, has this happened to anyone else? Could this be a gift? I do believe in ghosts, but I've never experienced anything like this before. I've always carried these two stories around, so I thought I'd share. First, some information about my great-grandmother, Gigi. She was born to immigrant parents in 1911 and passed away at the age of 94. Her father was an Englishman and her mother was Luxembourgian. Most of her family spoke German as well as English. However, Gigi only knew a little German. Gigi's mother only spoke German and was also almost completely deaf. Gigi relied on either her sisters to translate the mangled German or a crude family sign language they had developed. Gigi grew up in rural North Dakota, and to frame the time period, she once told me about how when she was a little girl, her family would regularly barter with the members of the Mandan tribe, whom she described as real Indians, not like today. She also only attended the local school to about the 6th grade. Later in life, she was not particularly bright, but not dumb. She was religious, but not a Bible thumper. The type of woman who would give you a religious birthday card and a Ninja Turtle action figure, who had a picture of Jesus, but never said grace. The one thing she was always very serious about was how she met the devil. Gigi would tell this story when prompted, but she never seemed to enjoy it and was always consistent in her description. When she was 10 years old, she was misbehaving. Her father wasn't home and her mother, again, didn't speak English. Her mother attempted to control her, but Gigi just ignored her. Finally, her mother tried to grab hold of her, but Gigi flailed and almost hit her mother. Gigi's mother caught Gigi's hand and looked Gigi cold in the eyes. She let Gigi go and pointed at the closet and left the room. Gigi and her siblings were often sent to the closet as a sort of time-out. And Gigi knew she had messed up, so she went to accept her punishment. When she opened the door, however, something was inside. Gigi said the being had hooves and was covered in dark fur, which subsided a bit on the torso and chest, up to the face. The being had a man's face, with dark eyes, an unkempt beard, and a mop of dirty black hair. And from only one side of its head rose a deer antler. Gigi said the being stepped forward slightly before she slammed the closet door shut. She shrieked, and her mother came to see what the commotion was. Gigi could only really cry and wave her arms, but her mother opened the closet door anyway. The being was gone. She was always very serious about that story, and admittedly, writing it even now makes me feel off somehow. That's the story of how my great-grandma met the devil. However, she also said aliens gave her a stroke. A few years before she died, Gigi had a number of strokes. She was in her 90s at the time. The first was not debilitating, it just took some time to recover. Some more quick info. Gigi and her husband, my great-grandfather, adored fast food. They had to substance hunt during the Depression to feed their children, so they marvelled at good food fast. Great-grandpa loved McDonald's, but Gigi loved pizza, specifically Godfather's pizza. After she had mostly recovered from a stroke, my family took my great-grandparents to Godfather's as a kind of celebration. Being a dumb kid, I got a bunch of quarters from my dad for an arcade game and ignored my nonagenarian great-grandparents. I had an odd number of quarters after the games, and the restaurant had one of those little toy dispensers, the ones with the plastic egg things. I bought one with my last quarter, and it was a tiny plastic alien giving a peace sign. Done with the games, I returned to the table. I was fiddling with the alien, classic grey looking, and Gigi noticed it. When I set the alien down, Gigi took it and inspected it closely. With everyone at the table, she held up the alien and looked at me and said, "Them's the things that come and got me." My mom, half laughing, said, "What, Grandma?" Gigi repeated herself and then said they were the reason she was in the hospital. When my grandfather told her she was in the hospital because of a stroke, she said, "These things gave me the stroke." The family just sort of stopped pressing at this point and things settled down. Most of my family chalked it up to a joke or her stroke. I don't buy it as a joke. Gigi was sweet, but not a joker. Furthermore, I don't think she knew what a grey alien was. She hadn't seen a movie since the 1950s. She didn't watch TV, and she only really read the newspaper. She mostly did crafts and listened to music in her spare time. As for it being a stroke hallucination, maybe, but it's still weird. Anywho, those are the stories of how my great-grandmother met the devil and how space aliens gave her a stroke. So a 16-year-old female friend of mine passed away last week, Wednesday, due to some kind of medicinal error. I had a huge crush on her and was planning to confess and ask her out, but I never got the chance. On Wednesday, she was taken to the ICU because her condition was worsening, and at 8 p.m, she passed away. I didn't know about it until the next day, when my friend told me at school. I was so devastated. I cried for God knows how long. Her funeral and cremation was to be on Friday, and all of my friends and I decided to go. On the day of the funeral, we all gathered to our classrooms to go there together. She also has a scent I could easily recognise, and I got that scent in the classroom right before we left. I thought I was imagining things and ignored it. At the funeral, we said goodbyes to her, gave her flowers and letters and all those things you do at a funeral, including crying. I told her I love her, that I will miss her, and left a bouquet of red roses on her chest. Although I said my goodbye, I didn't want to let her go yet. When I got back home, I took a shower and tried to relax, but I could only think about her in things I didn't say and would start crying. Therefore, I thought I would take my mind off it by playing some video games. So I started playing FIFA 19 on my PS4, and it was going well. However, at around 8 p.m, my cat was rummaging around upstairs, so I went to bring her down. After I successfully drove my cat away, I started making my way back downstairs. But as I was halfway down the stairs, I heard my deceased friend yelling, "Hey, Red!" As I still wanted to see her and talk to her, I quickly went around the house, looking for where the voice came from. When I went outside, I could hear the neighbours' kids playing loudly, but the voice I heard was quite different from theirs. My cat was staring at the garage, but I couldn't see anything. I gave up and thought to myself maybe I'm hallucinating and went back to playing FIFA. 30 minutes later, I heard another "hey" right beside me. I looked around me and saw nothing. I then started crying again as I told myself I'll never see her again. Fast forward to this Monday, my friends and I gathered again to just chill. I then brought up what happened on Friday. Turns out, my friends also had something to share. My mate said he heard knocks on his windows, but was too afraid to open them. My other friend said some kind of motor made sounds while she and her mother were talking about the friend who died. As soon as we finished our stories, I caught the scent of her again. I searched for her, yet nothing. On Tuesday, we did some kind of sermon or ritual that would release her spirit. In the middle of it, I got one last scent of her, as if she was sitting beside me. After that, it was gone. I no longer get those scents or any visits at all to this day. So yeah, that's my story of how I got visited by my crush. In the early 90s, I had a buy-sell trade record store in a historic neighbourhood of my city. I lived in the loft upstairs with a roommate, John. He had just moved back to town from Portland, where he had just finished a tour as a guitar tech for the band Everclear. Nothing romantic, just a really nice and easy friendship, with lots of music, laughs, fun and adventure, or misadventure, depending on how you look at it. John was a tall, dark, bushy-haired guy with piercings everywhere, tattoos everywhere, big silver skull rings on his fingers and chains on his waist, long jean shorts, black leather jacket and Doc Marten boots. He presented an imposing figure, but he was just the sweetest guy ever. He had the greatest laugh, perfectly straight white teeth and an unforgettable smile. We got along great, and I loved just hanging out with him. One lazy afternoon, we were up in the loft watching TV. Jerry Springer of all things. It was a bright sunny day, and the south window was open, a gentle breeze coming through. I was seated on my bed against the south wall, with the open windows, and John was seated on a couch to the left of me. He got up to go to the kitchen for something, and I said, "Hey, you should reach into the freezer and get yourself a Dove bar, and grab me one too while you're there." He returned with 2 ice cream Dove bars, one for each of us, and we went about eating them and resumed watching Springer. The TV was on the wall directly across the room from where I sat. As I was looking at the TV, I saw a sudden flash of golden light splash across the wall behind the TV. I had barely enough time to process that, wondering what had caused it, when overhead there was another light or something up on the ceiling. What I saw was like a playing card, like an ace of hearts, only without the A's in the corner. A large heart inside a rectangle shape just appeared out of nowhere on the ceiling above our heads. I looked at John to say something, and he had his head tilted back, scraping the last bit of ice cream off of the stick. And because of this, he saw everything I saw, and he was completely freaking out. His mouth full of ice cream, pointing and trying to say something, his eyes all wide and excited. I was so glad that he saw it too, because I was sure as heck didn't know how to explain it, and I was hoping that he could. I'd lived there for at least 2 years at that point, and had never seen any flashes of light or images on the ceiling or walls before that day. And I never did after that day either. John and I talked about it often, and neither of us could come up with a suitable explanation as to how or why it happened, except to say that that was one crazy haunted loft. If anyone out there knows anything about this kind of paranormal experience, I hope you let me know. It's boggled my mind for years. My parents divorced when I was 5. We lived in a small town where everyone knows everyone. probably too well. My mother had to find a place and a job quickly, and she ended up working at a convenience store and renting a house near town. The house was built sometime not long before the Civil War. It was old, white on the outside with a green roof and large front porch and green porch ceiling. Inside, the ceilings were about 14 feet high. The walls were tongue and groove. One thing to note was how odd the walls were painted. When you first walk in, you're in a yellow foyer. The entrance to the house were double doors, and directly across the foyer were double doors to the living room. To the right was a pink bedroom with purple floors. My mom, my brother and I all slept in this room because it was the only room with a fireplace that was unblocked. To the left of the foyer was a yellow bedroom with a blocked fireplace. That room was a junk room. Behind that bedroom was a kitchen, complete with appliances from the 50s that miraculously still functioned. And behind that room was my playroom. It was blue, had a blocked fireplace, and was constantly cold. Finally, the living room and bathroom were add-ons to the house. In their place used to be a screened-in porch, which had since been closed in to make these rooms. As a result, most interior doors had small window panes going around them, because at one point they were exterior doors. In the back of the house you could see the fields, outhouses, caved-in slave shacks, etc. My childhood memories are spotty at best, but I can relate things that I remember, and things my mother and uncle said. I remember being in the front foyer and looking up at the ceiling, and feeling as if I were dizzy and falling, as if gravity reversed itself. I would often stick my head between my knees and look out behind me, trying to duplicate this feeling. It was scary and fun at the same time. Anytime I, or anyone for that matter, would walk into my playroom, it was always extremely cold. It was so cold that the windows always stayed shut, even in the middle of summer. In the wintertime, that room was unbearable. Sometimes in the dead of night, we would be laying in my mother's waterbed in the pink bedroom, and you could hear what sounded like a newborn baby crying from that room, all the way across the house. My mom would get up to go check it out, and when she arrived at the door, the crying would stop. This happened multiple times while we lived there. Another time, my mom was dressing in the pink bedroom and looked over to the window to find a man staring at her. She was more angry than shocked and ran outside to confront him, only to find no one present. My uncle would frequently stay over and would often have objects fly at him, doors slam behind him. Whatever was there clearly never wanted him around. One incident stands vivid in my head. My mother and I were sitting on the couch, and that playroom door was in view of where we were sitting. We were watching TV, and we heard the click and turn of a door handle. The door to the playroom opened on its own, and then slammed shut with enough force to crack one of the window panes surrounding the door. There were no windows open, and the only other person in the house was my younger brother. These doors were heavy, solid wood with huge brass doorknobs. There was no way that door should have done that on its own. My mother looked over at me and said, "I think it's time we go to bed." The neighbour across the street had lived in his house for at least 20 years prior to our move-in. He knew the family that owned the house. The same family has owned the house for the entire time it stood. So he was told, around this turn of a century, a woman lived in the house. She wasn't mentally well, and at some point she gave birth to a baby. The baby was deformed, and she killed it and burned it in the fireplace. This is how my uncle tells it. My mother says that the neighbour told her that the baby was stillborn and was cremated in the fireplace. We don't know for sure, but likely it was my playroom that the baby was cremated in. We moved out in the summer of 1996, and no one has lived in that house since. I would ask my stepmother about it from time to time, and I even went looking for it once. The house is so overgrown that it's hard to spot from the road. It sits vacant, rotting and decaying. So this happened about 2 years or so ago, but it still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. There's a local factory that was made in 1890 and opened in 1891 as a sewing factory, where people handcrafted detachable collars and cuffs. In 1999, it was repurposed as a bunch of little consignment shops throughout the whole building in each room. Today, there's still the original huge elevator shafts with rickety gated doors. Anyways, one night me and my friend decided to go and check out one of the bookshops that just opened up there. We headed downstairs, went and left the store, and eventually took a break on one of the benches before leaving. To our knowledge, nobody else was in the building, or at least in the basement with us. So we're sitting there, and the way the bench is positioned is flat up against a wall, where you can see all the way up the hallway, with the flight of stairs to our right, and no one on the steps to our left. While we were sitting there talking, I started feeling this uncomfortable feeling and tried telling my friend I wanted to leave, and to hurry up, because I didn't like this feeling. He told me to calm down, and that we'd leave in a minute, and the uncomfortable feeling went away. As we were about to get up and go, we saw someone come around the corner and start approaching us. We figured it was the maintenance worker, but that feeling of uncomfortableness came over me again, yet worse this time. Now the way he turned the corner was completely unnatural. He walked to the end of the hallway, stared at the wall in front of him for a solid 5 seconds, and then turned towards us and took a brief pause before coming our way. The way he turned the corner though, it seemed like he just knew we were there and was completely unfazed when he saw us. I would say that's plausible, but we were being fairly quiet, and the hallway was a solid 30 to 40 feet long, so we'd have to be talking decently loud for him to hear us. I went into panic mode, but my friend kept their cool. The place was still open. We weren't breaking any rules, just sitting on this bench. My friend calmly looked at him and just said, "Hi, how you doing?" And the man didn't say anything. He just kept walking towards us at a somewhat rapid pace. I remember looking him in the eyes. He had zero expression. Not anger, not happiness, not confusion. Just nothing. It was very unsettling. Even after my friend said something to him, he was completely unfazed. He was just on a mission to get to us. You'd assume if this was a maintenance worker, he'd either tell us it's time to leave, or say hi back, or something, anything. But no, just this blank, expressionless face making his way towards us. After he didn't respond to my friend and started getting close to us, we just gave each other this "we need to go" look and sprinted out of there. When we got out of the building and down the road, the uncomfortable feeling left me and I started calming down. We didn't really talk about what just happened. We just went on our way back to my house. Ever since that night, I haven't been back to the factory or any of the shops there. Something about that man wasn't right, and it sent chills down my spine seeing him, and it sent chills down my spine just typing this. I'm a firm believer of the paranormal, and I can just about guarantee that whatever that was, definitely wasn't human. I've had a few spooky experiences in the past, which other people had also experienced, but nothing quite this spooky. The last thing was probably 10 or so years ago. Whether this is relevant or not, I'm a 37-year-old male who lives in Birmingham, England. I live with my wife, my Japanese Akita dog, and my wife's mom, who we care for as she's really unwell with her health. Her husband died just over 5 years ago. So in the night, I had a really bad dream. When I was woken up by my wife, I realised the dream I had was a continuation of other dreams, which was a continuation of other dreams. So I was in a dream series. If you've never had them before, they can be weird. In this dream, there was a giant pink balloon in what will be our child's bedroom. We're planning on starting a family soon. Upsetting, I know, but this balloon is in memory of a child who has died. Presumably our daughter, who isn't even born yet. My wife made this balloon. I remember other dreams. I was scared of this balloon. In my dream, this balloon followed me, and I felt it was trying to kill me. Then it floated past me, and I screamed and ran to the toilet. My wife came to the toilet to see why I was shouting, and I told her the balloon is going to kill me. She didn't believe me, until the balloon opened the door. This is when I woke up, and then stuff happened in my waking life, which we both experienced. I went downstairs to get a drink, and came back to bed. She asked me about my dreams, so I told her. When in bed, I felt a very eerie coldness about my body as I tried to forget the dream. Then I thought about the balloon and looked at my TV. Soon as that happened, the LED lights behind my TV turned on. The exact second, I shit you not. This made me slightly panic, and my wife thought it was weird. My wife's mum's husband, who died, was an electrician. He had an obsession with LEDs too. I'm not saying this was him, but the LEDs have randomly came on the night before. Maybe something to do with my PS5 updating in the night. I'm not sure. They turned on and off within 10 seconds of my TV turning on. They were on for about 2 minutes. Then something which shook me to the core and stopped me being able to breathe for a couple of seconds happened. The LEDs turned off, and about 2 seconds later, the TV flashed. This has never happened before. We both saw it, and where it flashed, it wasn't the whole 46-inch screen. It was an oval-shaped flash which looked like it was the same shape and size as either a big balloon or a human face. We were both really scared. I got out of bed and turned the TV and everything else electrical off from the wall. I struggled to sleep. My body kept going extremely cold, although I myself was sweating and warm. The heating was on and it was about 23 degrees in the house, plus body heat and duvet. Our dog normally sleeps in the room, but was sleeping outside the room at the top of the stairs, which isn't completely abnormal, but normally he is in our room. I eventually got back to sleep, which was thankfully uneventful now. Anyway, this was my story about being terrified last night. I hope it never happens again. I'm an Italian 24 male, and am skeptical and don't believe in ghosts, despite a series of unexplainable events which terrorised my colleagues, while I tried my best to investigate them to no avail. This is a recount of the phenomena I encountered while working at this old abandoned medieval village-turned-hotel. It started with a Russian woman on holiday with her husband. As I was leading her to the room, she stopped in front of the door, asking me if something bad happened there, because she felt a bad energy. I brushed it off, and when going back to the front desk, cracked a joke to my colleagues. They told me the old owner hanged himself in that room. The private church bell rang 3 times by itself. It's a small medieval church with nothing electric, and I held the key to the only door. My other female co-workers didn't want to go investigate, but I didn't want a guest breaking into the place or something, so I went to check. The door was still locked, as was the door to the bell. As I opened it, the rope was swinging as if it was pulled until that moment. Night shift co-worker never going to the kitchens to eat ever again, after he came running back upstairs where I was, not telling me what happened. As I was having a meal, multiple weird events over the following nights happened, including one table blanket slowly flapping around as if moved by wind, despite no windows or ACs and other tables being perfectly still. Chairs moving upstairs and making a lot of noise. When I confronted my supervisor about it, he said he never moved from what was the only chair in the back office. Me having an overwhelming feeling of something looking at me while eating. I start looking around the room just to find a door curtain immediately swing closed. I rushed to open it and found nothing outside. Odd thing is, it was atop a big flight of stairs, so nothing could possibly get away that quickly. I asked my co-worker if he was pranking me, and he said he never moved from the office. I heard my name distinctly called from upstairs. I was annoyed at the interruption, and when going upstairs, the other guy said he never called me, nor heard any voices. One night, I was passing by the old village well. Don't know why, but I had the urge to look down into it. As I did, I notice something swimming away in a flash and submerging. Can rats fall in wells?